Applicants can select from the more common he, him, she, her, they, them pronouns, but James, if you really want to get fancy, options include sie, them, sie here, am, and here. I think that's how you say it.
People who think fairy pronouns are a thing might soon be running our country. We're going to break down this truly insane story and so much more on this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across our politics and across the internet, all from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around, and regardless, do hit that like button as we go along, and do remember to comment with your thoughts, because I do take the time to read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Now up first, we've got to check in on the Kamala Harris presidential campaign, because they are not having a normal one. It's just been revealed that when you go to the official Kamala Harris website and you apply for jobs, up pops a list of pronouns, including some insane options. Let's go to my friends at Sky News for some more information.
Well, if you've got an interest in politics, boy, do we have an opportunity for you. You can join the Kamala Harris campaign team. All you've got to do is fill out a simple application form. You just got to provide your name, your age, and of course, your pronouns.
Yes, applicants can select from the more common he, him, she, her, they, them pronouns, but James, if you really want to get fancy, options include sie, them, sie here, am, and here. I think that's how you say it.
Yes, guys, this is 100% real. I did confirm the screenshot myself, and the options do include sie, them, sie, her, am, her, fey, fair, which, guys, that refers to fairy pronouns, people who identify as a fairy. Now, what I was surprised to see was that there was no input your own or create your own box, which in a very bigoted and offensive twist means that Kamala Harris is actually suggesting that the number of gender identities is finite. That's very problematic and very outdated, of course. Joking aside, this really shouldn't come as that much of a surprise from the politician who told us that she believes we should always stay woke.
We have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke. and you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke. Yeah.
So I do want to talk about a couple points related to this story that I do think have some significance, although I acknowledge that this story is ultimately just, a little bit of absurdity. It's not the end of the world. It's not exactly of earth-shattering consequence. It does, however, raise a couple of important questions. Who exactly are the people behind Kamala Harris's team who think that fairy pronouns are a legitimate and coherent thing? And how do they explain or articulate that belief? Does Kamala Harris co-sign this? That's something I would really love to know, because I imagine these kinds of decisions, right? Like what options go in a box in an application portal, that's way below her pay grade, right? That's her people way at the bottom of her team, of her food chain, are doing this kind of stuff. So I highly doubt she personally signed off on fair pronouns. But it is nonetheless very telling about who Kamala Harris picks to run her team and who she would put in positions of power if she became president. I think it is fair to conclude from this story something of much greater significance than a silly little pronoun box, which is that Kamala Harris would appoint to high levels of the federal government the kind of people who think infinite neo-pronouns are a legitimate and real and valid concept. That is frightening, not because of just the pronoun nonsense, but because those kinds of people, I can tell you from my woke college days at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and from my time on TikTok, those kinds of people tend to have breathtakingly radical political views. So that tells us that Kamala Harris's team is much more on the hard left Democratic fringe than it is in the centrist establishment of the Democratic Party. That should be concerning to anybody who wants to see sane, level-headed people promoted to positions of prominence in both political parties. And it all goes to show how out of touch Kamala Harris is with the American people. Because, newsflash guys, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, independents or moderates, Most Americans, 99%, do not know that fairy pronouns exist, and if they were informed about such a concept, would laugh in your face. So Kamala Harris's team is remarkably out of step with the public they're hoping to represent. And there's also a media angle here, guys. Kamala Harris has totally evaded doing press conferences or sit-down interviews since becoming the Democratic nominee for president. That's unfortunate for many reasons, but one small reason is that I would really love to see her ask to explain this on camera, live, in real time. Madam Vice President, could you please explain to us them pronouns, what they mean, and why it was important for you to include them in your application portal? The word salad that would ensue would be a clip for the ages. But both because Kamala is dodging media accountability and scrutiny and robbing the public of their right to hear her pressed on important issues, and because the mainstream media outlets that she would grant interviews to probably wouldn't ask her about something like this because they know it would make her look bad, we're not going to get to see that. Most likely, unless she does end up doing an interview with Fox News or something like that, which I would highly encourage and I think would be a spectacle for the ages. I don't want to make too much of this story because at the end of the day, what really matters are the bread and butter policies that affect people's wallets and lives and safety. But it is slightly concerning to me that we have people at the highest levels of our politics who are all in on the neo-pronoun gender identity insanity. What do you guys think? Do you want to entrust the future of our country to people who think fey and fair are pronouns? Let me know in the comments below, and do remember to hit that like button. Up next, we've got to check in with right-wing content creators because some of them are currently having a meltdown over a joke about white people and tacos. That's right, we're going to catch up on the latest right-wing snowflakery coming from good friend of the show, Matt Walsh. But first, the context you need to know is that Kamala Harris and her vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, recently released a social media video where they discussed food and seasoning and spices that was, to be fair, incredibly cringeworthy and poorly done, and as a result, went viral. Let's take a look at that video, and then we'll get into the unusual right-wing response.
Like I have white guy tacos and
What does
like
that
black,
mean? Like mayonnaise and tuna? What are you doing?
pretty much ground beef and cheese.
That's
and
okay. Do you put any flavor in it?
No.
Oh.
Here's the deal. No, they said to be careful and let her know this, that black pepper is the top of the spice level in Minnesota, you know.
I'm the first vice president, I believe, who has ever grown chili peppers.
I'm trying to expand my food knowledge.
You know what? We've got some cantaloupes. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
So when I first saw this clip, I rolled my eyes incredibly hard because it's just so stilted, so cringe, it feels so pandery and so inauthentic. But what I did not do was go and clutch my pearls and start crying about how offended I was as a white person that anybody would possibly make a mayonnaise joke or a joke about white people not liking spicy food, because I don't get offended easily. I've spent years making fun of liberal snowflakes who melt into puddles of tears anytime somebody says something that slightly hurts their fifis. So I wasn't about to get triggered by a joke, even a bad one that wasn't really funny, about white people. But some people on the right felt differently. Perhaps most prominently, the Daily Wire host, Matt Walsh. Let's take a listen to what he's had to say about this very offensive, deeply, deeply racist and upsetting comment from Kamala Harris, where she suggested that white people might like bland food. Here's his segment entitled, Kamala Harris is an anti-white bigot.
Everyone's skipping over the more important point, which is that a presidential candidate just casually dropped anti-white racism in the middle of what was supposed to be a lighthearted video. You know, Tim Walz says that he makes white guy tacos, and Kamala says, what is that, mayonnaise and tuna? Like, that is anti-white racism. That's what that is. And if you don't believe that, right, if you think that I'm overstating the case, all right, well, just imagine it the other way. Imagine a black guy says to Donald Trump, I make black guy tacos. And Donald Trump says, oh, what is that, like fried chicken and watermelon? Maybe sprinkle some Kool-Aid powder over top. Am I right? How do you think everybody would react to that? What do you think the reaction would be? Nuclear meltdown, literally. I mean, they would probably shoot a nuclear missile at Donald Trump for that. They would execute him via nuclear attack if you were to say something like that. I mean, the outrage would be so immense, we would never hear the end of it. The date of this black guy taco comment would be remembered by the media forever and memorialized. Like For years after, they would solemnly refer to 8/16, right? We'd have January 6th. Do you remember 8/16? I remember where I was on 8/16. The day of the fried chicken and watermelon taco joke. They would be weeping in the street. They would build statues and memorials to the lives lost because of the taco joke. KFC and Kool-Aid companies would come out and denounce Trump over this. So would every watermelon distributor in the country. And we all know that. This is another one of those things where, like, there are people that are going to clip this. They're going to take this clip of me saying that the comment from Kamala Harris was anti-white racism, and they're going to try to present it as though it's just, like, on its face absurd. And yet even they know that what I'm saying is 1,000% true, because you damn well know that that comment the other way, it wouldn't even be a discussion about whether it's racist. It would be considered the most racist thing a president has ever done, including the presidents who own slaves.
You know, guys, I'm starting to think Matt Walsh might have a slight penchant for hyperbole. No, there would not be nuclear weapons, or no, it would not be labeled the most racist thing a president has ever said and done. However, I do take Matt's point about the hypocrisy. I do acknowledge that if Trump made a joke about black people tacos having fried chicken and watermelon, that many liberal pearl clutchers would scream bloody murder and say, that's racist. But do you know what people like me and Matt Walsh would say? We would say, no, it's fine. It's funny. It's just a joke. Get over it. Don't be a snowflake. Because it should be okay to joke about things. And people who get massively offended over jokes that are completely lighthearted and have no real malice or ill will or substance or toxic history behind them are snowflakes. But Matt is essentially saying, because they would be snowflakes if Trump said something similar, I'm also going to be a snowflake. And I'm going to accuse Kamala Harris of anti-white racism and being a bigot just because she made a joke about white people not liking spicy food. That is not owning the libs. That is becoming the libs to spite the libs. And you're going to have to count me out on that one. Yeah, the original joke is cringe and stilted and not particularly funny. But if you spent years complaining about liberal and progressive snowflakes, you cannot get all up in arms and get all triggered and scream racism if somebody makes a joke about mayonnaise and white people. Just because they would get offended if the situations were reversed doesn't mean that that's good or something we should emulate. We should be pushing back on humorless woke scolds who get offended too easily, not becoming one of them to spite them. I mean, just in the last few weeks, Kamala Harris has unveiled insane economic plans, flirted with open communist price controls, and done so many other things that are worthy of substantive criticism and pushback. But instead, some folks on the right, like Matt Walsh, dedicated entire segments of their show to playing the victim over a joke about white people and tacos. If you ask me, that is silly and hypocritical. But you guys let me know what you think in the comments below. And now we've got to check in with Donald Trump, who on the campaign trail this weekend said something that if he was still at the Wharton School of Business would have gotten him a big fat F in economics. Let's take a listen to what Trump had to say about tariffs, which are taxes placed on imported goods into the country, and how they're put on other countries. They're not a put on us, and they don't affect America's economy at all. Take a listen.
A tariff is a tax on a foreign country. That's the way it is, whether you like it or not. A lot of people like to say, oh, it's a tax on us. No. It's a tax on a foreign country. It's a tax on a country that's ripping us off and stealing our jobs. And it's a tax that doesn't affect our country. And you could see hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs on other countries also.
So this statement by Trump is just totally flat out incorrect. It is technically true that tariffs are typically formally levied against foreign businesses and importers. So in that sense, they are taxes on foreign companies, sure. But the practical effect of that is that the price of imported goods goes up by typically close to the full amount that the tariff is accounted for. So American consumers face higher prices as a result of tariffs. They are, in effect, a tax on consumers because that's who ultimately bears the incidence recipients of the tax. In the same way, the sales tax is technically applied to companies, not to consumers. But to say it doesn't affect consumers would be wrong, because companies add it to your bill. So essentially, it's a tax on consumers. It's kind of the same thing with tariffs. And we don't just have to argue about the hypothetical or about the semantics here. We have real life data and examples over and over again of how tariffs do affect and do hurt the American people, even though they're technically levied against overseas companies. Remember, Trump put hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs in place during his first administration, and we do have the results. And those results overwhelmingly show that American consumers paid the price. You don't have to take my word for it. Just ask the Federal Trade Commission. As Reason reported, a 2023 FTC report found that American companies and consumers bore nearly the full cost of Trump's tariffs because import prices increased at the same rate as the tariffs. Reason's Eric Bohm continues that after investigating the consequences of both Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum and his tariffs on China, the International Trade Commission reported that in both cases, domestic price increases matched the cost of the tariffs almost exactly. The US ITC estimated that prices increased about 1% for each 1% increase in tariffs, the report states. Many studies found similar results. The economist Scott Lincacombe posted on Twitter a summary of a bunch of different studies that all looked at Trump's tariffs and found different amounts of costs imposed on consumers, anywhere from $379 for each average household to as much as $1,277 per household. It depends on which tariff you look at and which analysis you cite, but they all agree that at least a hefty chunk of the tariffs is borne by American consumers. Now, Trump and other protectionist people who want to restrict foreign trade are totally free to argue that the costs are worth it, that whatever benefits they say these tariffs will cause are worth the trade-off. I disagree, but we can and should have that good faith debate. But what they can't do is claim that tariffs accomplish their goals, but don't have costs and don't affect American consumers at all. That is totally detached from reality, economically illiterate, and not intellectually honest. You guys let me know what you think in the comments below, but this take from Trump, for me, was a big fat L. And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from across the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slugs.
Today, we're going to take a look at a truly wacky video where a TikToker explains to us how we can decolonize our romantic lives by unlearning our racial preferences in dating. Let's take a look.
I am so tired of having the conversation about preference. Like, y'all just took that word and turned it into something entirely different. You normalize plastering the word preference over their dating discrimination and then just making that okay. That was genius, but hot take, just because you put the word preference over your dating discrimination does not mean it's not discrimination. If you do not date people of a certain race, you have to think about why. Upbringing can be a big part of it, but if you're a white person who has grown up in Idaho with only white people your whole life, you should make an effort to expose yourself to other cultures so that you don't harbor biases and prejudices against people of other communities. Like, that's just a basic civic duty thing to do. Instead of decolonizing our minds, we have clung back to these prejudices by normalizing this idea of preference.
Decolonizing our minds. There's more from this video that we'll play in a second, but I wanted to talk about this for a second because I had not heard that one before. I don't know if you guys have. Let me know in the comments. I wasn't aware that my mind had been colonized. But right from the get-go, I just find this whole premise totally incoherent and pointless, but I'll get into that in a minute. But the idea is that if you have racial dating preferences of some kind, like maybe you're attracted typically to Black and white people, but not Asian people, that is somehow problematic or racist or something you need to unlearn rather than just, a preference that people have, the same way people sometimes are attracted to brunettes over blondes or vice versa. I totally reject this premise, perhaps because I come at it from the vantage point of a gay man. And using this exact same logic, I feel like we're being kind of generous calling that, but using this exact same logic, you could just as easily say that I need to unlearn my sexist preferences of not being attracted to women. I was raised in patriarchy, and perhaps those preferences are internalized of the colonized patriarchal mind, and if you find yourself discriminating and calling it a preference, you should unpack that. No, babe, that's my sexuality, and that's okay. In the same way, People are attracted to who they're attracted to. Now, if somebody was not wanting to be friends with someone because of their race, I would agree. That is problematic and is something they should try to unlearn. But we cannot control who we are sexually attracted to, and that is a genuinely odd thing to suggest that people need to police or control or overcorrect. I mean, we can just electroshock you until you find this specific race sexually attractive. Like, what? Why are we doing this? There's more, so let's take a look at the second half of this video.
Like, even if your preference is not completely exclusionary, you have to ask yourself, like, why do I mainly find people of this race unattractive? 9 out of 10 times your attraction stems from either fetishization, discrimination, or again, your upbringing. Either way, all of it is a problem, and the reason is because racism exists. If racism didn't exist, we wouldn't have this problem because all of our racial preferences would kind of even out. We'd virtually have equal amounts of people who like black girls, Latinas, white girls, etc. In fact, if we didn't have a racial structure, we probably wouldn't even have these preferences in general because people would find beauty in everyone. But currently this is not the case because racism plays a big part in our racial preferences. If we were to map it out, we would see that a lot of our preferences stem from white supremacy. We generally have more people liking white people, less people liking black people, and all of that in between. So by normalizing these preferences in dating, you're also normalizing the idea that it's okay to not find these people attractive because of their race, which reifies the racial structure in general. So hope this helps.
Narrator. It did not, in fact, help. I mean, again, just every point here could be made about gender and sexuality. The fact that you're attracted to men over women is because of patriarchy, and if we didn't have patriarchy, these things would go away. No, babe, they wouldn't. Your attraction's based in fetishization. Nope, you have no basis for that. What I find really funny was that even the comment section on TikTok, which is a woke hellscape of an app, ate this girl up, was not having her take. One person wrote, "This entire argument is honestly undoing the LGBT argument. LOL, if you can change who you're sexually attracted to, then someone is capping somewhere." Yes, I love that. I mean, you're right, which is why she's so wrong and so cognitively dissident and hypocritical. Another person says, "Thank you. Race preference is weird, unless you're a person of color." And she said this in a reply. Okay, wait, so now racial preferences are okay, but just for some people of a certain skin tone against other people. Girl, your math is not mathing. If it's actually evidence of a bias, if it's actually problematic, then it has to be problematic for everyone, not just one way. Now, I actually agree it's okay for people of color to have racial preferences because I think that's fine for everyone, as long as you're not generally discriminating or being mean or having hostility towards people overall. You should just follow your heart, and whoever you're attracted to, another consenting adult that is attracted to you, knock yourself out and don't overthink it, as far as I'm concerned. But y'all cannot have this both ways. No, no, no. Another person says, "Okay, so please explain to me how I'm supposed to change who I'm attracted to." Yeah, exactly. There is no way to do that. So this whole argument is just invoking racism and victimhood for its own sake, with no actual solutions possible, which I think is probably the point. Another person says, "Who cares? You're not going to argue someone into being attracted to you, and why would you want to?" Another person writes, "Chronically online take, trying to guilt people into changing their romantic interest is quite literally coercement." Yeah, that's the other thing here. I do agree with this. It is kind of creepy and maybe a self-report that, like, you're just not attractive or whatever if you have to try to bully or guilt people into finding you attractive. Like, I know people of all races and identity groups who have no problem having people interested in them. Okay, there's not some shortage of people who find people in this certain group attractive. Maybe it's just you, babe. And maybe it's not even your appearance, but it's your crazy social justice vibe energy that you're giving off that's having people not so interested in hitting you up. Anyway, you see this discourse a lot about racial dating preferences, and I always just come at it from the perspective of a gay person and saying, like, everything you're saying right now could be said about sex and gender, and it makes no sense in that context, so it has to make no sense in this context as well. That's just my take. Do let me know in the comments if you disagree, and do remember to hit that like button to reward my suffering, because I do lose brain cells watching these TikToks and scrolling through that hellish dumpster fire of an app to find content for your enjoyment. And now I'll read a few of your comments to wrap up today's episode. One person says that, referring to the CNN segment where everyone was fighting and they were talking about the pronunciation of Kamala's name, and I said that's disrespectful to intentionally mispronounce it. Somebody comments, "It's disrespectful of somebody who needs to be disrespected. Harris doesn't deserve anything. Boy, bye." So I don't agree with this. I do believe in treating your political opponents with respect, but even if you don't, I would say you should still do it so that the supporters of that person or the people who are somewhere in the middle don't feel defensive or put off by your criticisms. And you can actually maybe change some people's minds. So even if you think the individual doesn't deserve respect, you're better off treating them with respect and just pushing back on their ideas, because the people out there that support that individual are more likely to be open to that or be convinced by that. Whereas if you just go in full disrespect, full ad hominem, they're going to feel defensive and they're going to be closed off to your message. Another person writes, did they seriously just spend 10 minutes on national television screaming at each other about where stress goes on a name? I'm not exaggerating when I say that this stuff puts me off on ever even visiting the US. I can't imagine dealing with this. Yes, they did, and it's totally indicative of how broken our media is, but don't let it stop you from visiting the US, my dude, because these are not normal people. We are not like this. You will not encounter this on the streets of America. You will just encounter it in the Beltway and in elite media circles and political halls of power and that kind of thing, which if you're smart, you won't go anywhere near. Another person says, if someone mispronounces my name, I don't care at all. This is so petty. Yeah, I mean, look, my last name pronounced Polumbo, but people pronounce it or spell it wrong all the time, and it doesn't bother me either. I do think if it was intentional, it would bother me a little bit, because I'd be like, are you just trying to be rude to me for no reason? So it is a little different in that case. All right, guys, that's it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Do remember to hit that like button before you go. Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet, and do comment with your thoughts. I do take the time to read the comments, so you might as well leave me with your thoughts from today's episode. And with that, we'll talk again tomorrow.